Hello, everyone. My name's Richard Nicol, and for those who don't know me, I'm the chairman of the Caterham and Load to 7 Club. And I'd like to welcome all our members to this webinar tonight with Caterham Cars, and particularly thank the gentleman from Caterham for giving up their evening to talk to us. It's much appreciated. The interaction will take the following forms. Question and answer. If you have a question that you'd like me to put to the panel from Caterham, or indeed any of my colleagues on the leadership team, then pop it in the chat box, and hopefully we'll get time to have a look at them later in the evening. Polls. We always conduct a few polls. It gives us an idea of what the club is about, as well as obviously giving us an understanding of what type of things members are interested in. So during the webinar, there will be a few snap polls to get your feedback on a number of issues. Of course, the best way to understand how this all works on polls is to try it out right now. So even before I get the opportunity to introduce our guest from Caterham Cars, let's just have a trial run and let's have the first poll. So in that respect, let me hand over to John. And John, if we can have the first two questions of poll 1, please.
Thank you, Richard. To get your fingers moving, poll 1, question 1 is, in what decade were you born? Question 2, how many miles do you typically do in a 7 each year?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, John. So let's get on with essentially the rest of the evening. And what we'll do here is, in terms of the programme that we have for you, I'm about to introduce Bob and the rest of the team. We'll give Caterham about 20 minutes, 25 minutes for them to go over a series of areas that we think you'll be interested in as the members. Then we'll have a poll. We'll then go on to the qualified the questions that were sent in ahead of tonight's webinar, followed by another poll. And then we're hoping they'll have time at the end to take your chat and any other questions that people have sent in through the evening. So we have a hard cut off at 9 o'clock. And I'm quite sure, looking at the number of questions that have come in, it'll be difficult to get through them all, but I will try my best. So without any further ado, if I can just introduce to you Bob Lashley, Dave Ridley and Simon Lambert from Caterham, and I'm going to hand over immediately to yourself, Bob. And for the next 20 minutes, you, Simon and David, have the chance to entertain and amaze us.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, Richard. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Bob Lashley. I think I've met some of you in the past. Richard described me earlier this evening as a shadowy figure in the background of Caterham for a while before I came CEO, which I'm not quite sure what that means, but we'll perhaps come on to that later. So I've been the CEO since July the 1st. My history in the automotive industry started in 1979, and I'm not going to bore you with a life story, just maybe a few bits and pieces from that period of time. So I started as an apprentice at a company we probably all know called Automotive Products. They made Lockheed brakes and Borg & Beck clutches at the time. When I finished my apprenticeship, I was destined to be a draftsman, but it never happened because it was in the days of when the unions were controlling things with the Red Robbo days, the 3-day week. And I ended up with a position that was normally going to the graduate apprentices rather than the technician apprentices. And I ended up in project management in that company. My drafting skills were resigned to the bin during my apprenticeship, and I never ended up being a draftsman, which is what I was training to be. But my drafting skills amounted to, I think I drew the rear drum brakes on an Austin Metro, which was being launched at the time, and probably drew a few clutches as well. So I can use a compass. That's about the size of my drafting experience. I can't turn on a CAD terminal. But since then, I've done various different roles. The last job I had at AP, before I left AP, there was a team of 50 of us, which I led the project management of to launch the first automated manual transmission. Basically, it was a manual transmission in every sense with a manual gear lever, but we deleted the clutch pedal with a hydraulic actuation system, and it was launched in 94, 95 in the Renault Twingo, the so-called Twingo Easy. Apparently, there's still some of them floating around in France. If you look out for the Renault Twingo Easy. And in 95, I joined Nissan and stayed there until I nominally retired in 2020. I started at Nissan as an engineer in the prototype manufacturing department. We used to try and replicate production parts to be engineeringly the same as production parts before we kicked off production tooling. In the modern days, all of that's done with simulation now and complicated computer mathematics, but we used to physically try and build parts that as much as possible replicated the part in production. Other roles in Nissan included being in charge of the prototype manufacturing shop. So the year I was manager, we built 100 prototype cars in Cranfield in the UK and supported all of the rest of Nissan's prototype activity globally by supplying prototype parts supplied from European suppliers, but to the US and to Japan as well. So that's, for me, particularly important experience for Caterham, because Caterham build 500 cars a year in similar methods to the way we used to build prototype cars. So I feel quite comfortable with the process of building cars the way Caterham build cars. My career in Nissan lasted 25 years. I was chief engineer in Europe for the Micra at some point, chief engineer for the Qashqai that was launched in 2011. And at that point, the engineering, production engineering and manufacturing all reported to me for the design and development of that particular model. But from there, some people say I joined the dark side and moved over to the business side of things and started working directly for the headquarters in Japan on the business side of things. First few years of that, I spent 2 or 3 days a week, 2 or 3 weeks of the year, so 2 or 3 weeks of the month in Mercedes-Benz, helping establish the cooperation that Nissan had with Mercedes. That cooperation lasted for 12 years. And the fruits of that you will see on the roads these days as the Infiniti Q30, which is a Mercedes A-Class with a different upper body built in Sunderland. The Mercedes X-Class, which is a pickup based around the Nissan Navara built in Spain. And in North America, Nissan used to and still does some build Mercedes-Benz engines under license, not only for Infiniti products, but also for Mercedes local plants in North America. So I was involved in establishing all of that business relationship, along with other business relationships with most of the OEMs on the planet. We sold the NV200 van to GM in the US and badged it as a GM, even though it was built in our plants. We licensed technology to and from different manufacturers, including Porsche. So that was quite an interesting time. And then somewhere around 6 years before I retired, somebody had the bright idea of making me responsible for the sports cars in Nissan, and the engineering team, the design team, the product planning team for GTR, Z, or Z as we always call it in Nissan because it's a North American product basically, all reported to me, along with I was responsible for all of the Nismo road cars, which included an Ismo GTR and Ismo Z, which were separate activities to the base program. So I always used to describe that as 100% of the motivation, 20% of the work, and making contracts with other car manufacturers was 80% of the work and 0% of the motivation, because you can imagine what it's like spending hours and hours in rooms with lawyers week in, week out, making contracts. So that's the career up to when I left Nissan. I retired from Nissan in 2020, just at the start of the pandemic. Spent 3 months after I'd finished working for Nissan in lockdown in Japan, because there was no flights back to the UK. During that time, contemplated what the next steps might be. The number of OEMs were apparently, I don't know why, interested in me joining them. But that evaporated in that period of time that the pandemic started. So I did some consulting work, and I was quite happy working a few days a month. And that was supposedly the future. Then in the beginning of 21, I had a phone call from a rather nice Japanese gentleman who was on the board member of VT Holdings, and I was asked by a question directly from Takahashi-san, our CEO of VT Holdings, if I wanted to help with Caterham. This was completely out of the blue, not my intention. His intention was to purchase the company from Tony Fernandez. I reiterated to him I didn't want a full-time job. I thought that would be the end of it, but fortunately or unfortunately, and time will be the judge of that for all of us, they came back and said, yeah, part-time job's okay. So in April the 1st, the day the company was the first day of ownership by VT, I became Chief Strategic Officer, and the intention was to work part-time and simply help with the future strategy and try and solve some of the systemic problems that the companies had with part supply, quality, and everything else. And we started to make inroads into that. The beginning of this year, we'd solved a lot of the problems before the current global crises that we face, like supply chain problems, lockdowns in China, and the war in Ukraine. But we'd solved some of the problems. We've still got some challenges ahead. And earlier in the year, Graham decided of his own volition that he wanted to retire. There may be lots of rumours about what emanated from there, and I'm getting to this grey picture in the background. It was never the intention that I would succeed Graham from anybody in the organisation. The reality was Graham decided he wanted to retire, which he did. And in May, Takahashi-san asked me if I would become the full-time CEO. And he asked in such a nice way, it was hard to say no. And I love the brand. I'm very passionate about being part of this Caterham family, from the people that work at Caterham to you, the owners. And I think, you are all a very important asset of this business in the past and moving forward. And we need to all respect that and work with you in the future. So I'm going to shut up in a minute and let the other guys have a go. But in terms of the future, legally, we can build Sevens with an ICE engine until 2034. We have spoken to car manufacturers that are planning to build ICE engines until 2034. So we don't see any barriers to building Sevens legally. At some point in that period, maybe it will become harder and harder to get ICE engines, because people and car companies will not be investing in developing new ones. I know there's some questions later about Euro 7, and Simon is much more capable of answering those than me, but the Euro 7 story is, I think there won't be that many manufacturers that start to develop really interesting products around that. They'll move to EV. But Simon can talk about that in more detail. And we have to improve the quality, and we have to make the product sustainable, in the sense that we can still have access to all of the parts, and some of the supply chain problems are associated around using parts that are well past their end of their life in an OEM. So we have a big development piece to do to make sure that is sustainable. The owners have given me permission to potentially take on the lease of a new building. We've identified somewhere, and we're negotiating with the landlord, and our intention within the next 18 months is to be in a new production facility, which will be new from the ground up in terms of the insides of what we have at our disposal to build sevens. And we hope that we can increase the capacity from the current 400 to 750. Business plans based around that, and it has the full support of VT Holdings, and it will involve a significant number of millions in investment, which is purely dedicated to the continuation of the seven. I'm sure there's questions later about EVs. We're looking at all aspects of EVs, and we're looking and aspiring to make a completely new model in parallel with the existing seven, and there's no intention for the seven to go anywhere in the long term. So I think with that, I'm going to shut up and let some of my more esteemed and intelligent colleagues say something about the brand and themselves.
Thanks for that, Bob. I'm not sure which one is the esteemed and which one is the intelligent one. So whichever one is the intelligent one. Dave, do you want to give us your 5 minutes worth?
You're such a flatterer, Richard. Yeah, I'll happily talk and say a few words about my experience of the business over the last 12 months since we last sat here and had this conversation. Much has obviously changed with Bob coming on board, and as Bob said, Graham took us all by surprise. He didn't speak to any of us about his decision in advance, so that was a change, but it's one that is definitely reaping benefits with Bob's experience coming in with the challenges we've faced this year, and it probably has been the most challenging of the 20 odd years that I've been with the business in terms of operations. The global supply chain challenges that the world has seen has obviously had an impact on us, and it's been a very frustrating period trying to satisfy customers' orders, keep customers appraised of the situation with the delays that we've been experiencing with new cars and parts, of course, which is affecting people trying to keep their cars mobile and on the road and on the track. We have really struggled, and that's the truth of the matter. A lot of it is out of our control, of course. I think Bob's touched on there are some systemic problems in the business that we know and recognize that we have to improve, and I'm glad to say that we can see real progress in those areas. It really does feel as if we're turning a corner now with regards to some of the supply chain challenges we faced all year, and we're trying to get back to delivering the right number of vehicles each month to the customers who are patiently waiting. But that's really been much of a theme of the year, as has the support that VT Holdings have given us. That's been another really important theme, that with these challenges, these interruptions to the business that we've had to deal with on a daily basis, it would have been very, very difficult to have survived without VT Holdings support. So that's been very satisfying to see the level of support that is present in Japan. For me personally and my team, it's been great to see that demand for the product just hasn't waned. We are still in the very fortuitous position where demand still outstrips our ability to supply cars. We effectively, with our dealer network, we have allocated nearly all of next year's production already. which is an incredible position to be in, to say that we know for each one of the 550 cars, however many it is that we plan to build next year, that there is a dealer name and if not a dealer name, a customer name alongside those slots. So that's hugely rewarding, and a great position for the business to be in. It certainly makes us feel secure for the future, but equally we recognise we can't rest on our laurels with that, and we have to build more cars. And that is the exciting challenge. And Bob has touched on the fact that we are looking to move premises and move factories so that we can try and capitalize on this demand that exists today. Myself and my team, we talk about being sales prevention officers. We have requests for new representation across the UK, across the globe. There are untapped markets, and right now we simply can't chase them. We can't go after them. We can't sell because we just don't have the capacity to satisfy that demand. So with one eye on the future, it's very exciting to think that we will be able to grow the dealer network, to grow the distribution globally, to enter some new markets, and to really start flexing our muscles and start, marketing, promoting, and trying to chase down some more sales. So that's exciting. It's also, been a very good year in terms of returning to shows and events. That's what my team is responsible for delivering for Caterham. So having had the COVID years, it's been great to really be back at a lot of shows and events this year. We've attended Goodwood, Festival of Speed, the Revival. We've run our drift taxi successfully, given 2,000 passenger rides over 4 days at the British Motor Show. And it's great to be out and about again and meeting customers and meeting potential customers and talking about the products and the brands. In addition, we've launched 3 new products this year, or 4 new products this year, apologies. So 3 for the UK, which is the 420 Cup, the Super 7 600, Super 7 2000. And then we've launched the 7340 for Europe, which is effectively the Duratec replacement product for the outgoing Sigma 275. So we've not had much time to sit around this year. There's been a lot of marketing activity to deliver across various markets, but it feels like there's been an awful lot to deliver, and an awful lot has been delivered. And we just need to do more of the same next year.
Okay, thank you for that, Dave. That's much appreciated. In which case, Simon, as the man who has all the answers to all the technical and other developments, what would you like to tell us for the next 5 minutes or so?
I'd like to tell you that I have the team that has all the answers. I certainly don't, but it was Steve Jobs that said, make sure you employ clever people to tell you what to do, not the other way around, and we firmly believe that. But I mean, a couple of things we have touched on and we talk about, we talked just before, and Bob mentioned it, things like EU7, to which I say, oh, blimey, give us a chance. We haven't finished with EU6 yet. Doing the homologation program for the 7340 that you've seen launched in Europe recently has eaten up our entire year. It seems like it should be something simple, but honestly, every day there's a new challenge and something new that has to be changed or developed or redeveloped or retested, tested again, then go through a testing program to make sure it will pass an actual test that is witness tested, because they are very hard to get, and you've really got one go at it. Otherwise, you have to wait months again. And you have to look at what other markets want. We think about the UK, where we just want a nice variety of cars at various power and low prices. You go into France, and the whole thing revolves around CO2 and the malus, which is this very punitive tax on CO2. So the French market wants high power and low CO2, and that takes an awful lot of work to achieve. I'm really pleased, actually. 340 has overachieved on power and overachieved or underachieved, whichever way you want to look at it, on its CO2 target. But The price we pay for that is that there's lots of other things that we know need doing on the car that we really want to do that have to take a back seat, because that model range is so critical to Caterham. 200 odd cars go into France and Europe in that specification, which is 40% of our production, and we need that. That's the lifeblood of the car, if you like. It's the same for Japan, because it's the same model that goes into Japan, which is another 200 odd cars as well, because whilst they don't have a small series homologation, they do just look to Europe and read across some of the things from that. So that is nearly clear. Once it's clear, and it's an answer I've actually given in a chat, once it's clear, we've got this nice backlog of problems we want to solve. The good thing is there isn't anything in the immediate horizon next year that's going to take nearly as long to do. So hopefully we'll start to see some other bits and pieces cleared and clear the place and see improvements in the car, which we really want to do. I say that, but obviously legislation is being thrown at us left, right and centre. Things that are challenging at the moment, things like the ULEZ, for those of us that live in London. I don't live in London. For those of us that live near London, you'll know about the ULEZ, and you'll know that it's expanding next year to cover a wider area, and that there are other cities around the UK that are always putting in these low emission zones as well. How are we going to combat those? Then we have the Spectra 2030 and 2035, which some people aren't 100% clear on what it is. 2030, pure ICE cars stop. You have to have either an EV or a hybrid car. And the term for it is either zero emission or SX, significant zero emission capable vehicle. So that means your 25-mile range on your BMW 330 hybrid is no longer going to be acceptable. They haven't decided what significant range is yet. That's still in consultation. Then 2035, that comes to an end as well. But it's not hard stops at those points, if you like, and just there. It is a ramp all the way. And I think quite a lot of people are unaware of that legislation comes into effect in January 24. And at that point, a percentage of every manufacturer's vehicles has to be zero emission. And that percentage grows and grows and grows to 2030 when it's about 80%, and then again right up to 2035. We've been in a fortunate position to have been in consultation with the Department for Transport on this, and sat on a round table with a Minister of Transport and gave our view, and that of the industry. In fact, we've worked with our colleagues at Ariel and Morgan and VAC, and we formed a little UK low volume group to tackle some of this. We are not going to be unaffected. It is going to hit us. But we believe we are getting a stay of execution for a number of years. We don't know how long that is, but we think we will be given a target, because the paperwork insists they've got to have one, and our target will be 0%. And that's one of the few targets I can confidently say that Caterham's going to hit over the next couple of years, is 0%. And then that will change probably later in the decade. But who knows where public demand will go by then as well. How many people actually want an electric 7? I'm sure quite a lot of people on this call right now will be saying no over their dead body. But actually, I think that's a view that will change. I think a lot of people will be surprised at just how good an EV7 is. I've said that before in a similar forum. And we will see where that goes. The other thing that I know has been touched on as well, and I'm sure there was something alluded to in some of these questions, is around kits and kit supply. And there seems to be a concern that kits are going to fall off the market. We've talked about it a lot internally. There is no legislation that says kits are going to be outlawed for the foreseeable future. IVA is going to continue, as far as we are aware, for the time being. Maybe that's a benefit of Brexit, if you like, if you can find one, because the UK can call its own shots on things like that, and those provisions that are in place can carry on. We would love to be able to offer kits, and we do know that the customer for them is changing. When I started, which was a very, very, very long time ago, customers building kits would sort of take it on as a challenge. Providing them with an assembly guide was an insult to their intelligence. They'd like to crack through it and see what they could do and overcome all the problems. These days, people want it as an enjoyable experience, much like putting together a Lego kit, every step of the way. And we're behind with that. We know that. the pictorial manual has been great in some ways, but in other ways, by making some of it a little bit easy, it means some bits are probably harder for a lot of people who weren't expecting to face that kind of challenge. It's something we want to work on. I'd love to sell more kits actually, rather than fewer kits, but we want it to be more about an experience of building a car, a really satisfying experience of building a car, and get to enjoyment at the end rather than the battle. And it is a little bit of a battle if we're honest with ourselves right now. There is loads for us to do, loads and loads of work for us to do. And a lot of these things around emissions and homologation, which are very, very boring, a huge distraction. It occupies 95% of the team's time, and trust me, they would rather be doing things that excite them and would excite you as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. You caught me on the hop there. You caught me mid drinking my coffee when you ended there. So that's 1 point to you. Now, before we get into the questions, and I see some of them have already been answered, obviously you've gone long, but before we do, I'm going to hand straight back to John for the second of this evening's polls.
Thank you, Richard. Poll 2, question 1. What is your primary reason for owning a 7? Question 2. Who does the servicing of your 7?
Thank you very much, John. So now we get into the meat of the evening again, looking at questions. I'm going to start with a simple one, and one actually carries on from what you were just saying, Simon, about kit build. And that was, we've had a couple of questions about why the more either high performance or more expensive models are not available to kit build. So the 620 and one specifically about the 420 Cup. What's the rationale behind what can be kit build and what cannot be? Do you want to take that one, Simon?
Yeah, no problem. With things like the 420 Cup and the 620, with the Sadev gearbox, and certainly so the 620, which has a far more complicated engine installation that only just fits in a Series 3 chassis. It's a packaging nightmare. To provide the experience that the customer wants, we would have to do a lot of work to the manual and the instructions for doing it. Whereas we don't believe that many people buying at that end of the product market actually want to build a kit. Dave would have to tell me how many 620 your potential 620 customers have said, "Can I buy it in kit form?" But it is a tiny number. So the work we would have to do outweighs the concept of actually selling a car to someone in that form. The 420 similar actually. We don't really believe that there are many people wanting to build that as a kit. And so to get ourselves geared up for it, there isn't sufficient demand, if you like, for us to gear ourselves up to provide the right experience. And I will label that as a bit of a point, that it should be a great experience building that kit. So we don't want to do something, add something in which is a bit half-assed.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving back to something that I think, Dave, you alluded to, which is about, markets and how you'd love to get into various markets. But I don't know whether Bob, either yourself or Dave, we've had quite a few questions about dealer networks and the sales strategy, where you're looking to increase sales, which are the more, which parts of the world are getting priority. And also, of course, back at home as well, if I can add that in, what are the plans for expanding, if indeed there are any, on dealer networks here in the UK? Is there any opportunity to expand that? So, Bob, do you want to take that, or do you want to hand it on to Dave?
I think that's a question for Dave.
Yeah, I'll happily do it, Bob. Richard, I think I did touch on this earlier. Of course, there's opportunity for expansion. There has to be. I don't think the network is complete in any of our key markets. I think we could always look to improve. But right now, and as I touched on earlier, next year's build schedule is allocated. It's done. So if I sign a new dealer up tomorrow, I can't get him demonstrators for 12 months. So it's a very long-winded process right now. And, there is an awful lot of movement behind the scenes that Bob is leading around facility, around supply chain to allow us to build more cars. And that is absolutely the ambition that we've been set from Japan. And that is the ambition that we all buy into. I feel that we can sell 750 cars a year. I believe that there is demand globally for that. I think we can sell more cars in the UK, but right now I can't supply enough cars to our existing network. If we were to, I've just done a tour of the UK dealers over the last 2 weeks to go and deliver a little Christmas cheer and a bottle of wine to each of them to thank them for their efforts. And they all want more cars. They all want more allocation of production, and I simply don't have it to give to them. So we are at this point at the moment where until we can really see some real change, which we are beginning to see in supply chain and in our facility, we've made the changes at Gatwick that I think everyone is aware of, where we decided to close the used car showroom and convert that side of the facility to new car production. That was done earlier this year as a means of trying to satisfy this unprecedented demand that we see at the moment for new cars. So yeah, there are definitely some other new markets out there that, as I say, we get approached by almost on a weekly basis from places in the Far East, people in America, other dealers in the UK that wish to represent Caterham. And as I say, at the moment, we just have to, take an interest and a record of that interest that has been shown. And in due course, when the time is right, we'll go back to it.
Great. No, thanks for that. And just to add to that, Bob, you mentioned about, looking for new premises, and we're talking about ramping up production. A couple of people asked questions. Is there any plan, or indeed were there plans that have not come to fruition about potentially building overseas, obviously with a Japanese owner, and large areas? Is the 7 going to remain in the UK, or do we see it being produced elsewhere in the world as well?
There's no plans to build it elsewhere. It's not anything we've ever put on the table. Certainly, one of the biggest attractions of a 7 in Japan is the fact that it is built in the UK, it is British built, and it is a classic British sports car. And every dealer that I've visited in Japan all are very proud of the fact they're selling something that is British craftsmanship. One of the dealers is even they've laid themselves out. If any of you have been, and I'm sure you have, to the Festival of Speed, they've laid out that their sales pitch in similar sort of pit garages to the Festival of Speed, and it is literally like walking into a bit of historical dealer that we would have seen in the UK years and years ago. So the answer to that is a no.
Great, thanks, Bob. And I think there was just one other in that particular issue. I noticed, David, you said, of course, that second-hand cars or pre-owned cars obviously have been moved to dealers. One of the questions was, how is that fitting in? Is there any potential for a dealer in the southeast if they now can't buy cars from Crawley? Is there any movement in that area at all?
Not imminently, no. The Gatwick showroom no longer has a used car facility, as we said, but servicing remains there, race car preparation remains, all the maintenance side, and new car sales is still available at Gatwick. So for the time being, no plans for any other dealer in the UK as we stand today.
Back to yourself, Simon. You touched on electrification, and I could probably spend the rest of the evening reading out 150 questions about EV. What's it going to look like? What size is it? What do you think it ought to be? When are we likely to see it? When is it likely to come? Can I just ask you to for example, give us a little bit more on that electrification. What would need to happen in order for Caterham to suddenly say, next year you will have one and it will look like this?
That's a question for Bob, and I'll let Bob answer that in a second. But I am going to chip in my two penneth, if you like, about EVs. I'm excited about the prospects of an EV7. I'm amongst the few people that's had the opportunity to drive a prototype one. I think we talked about this last time, just how good it is actually. And I don't really understand what it is people are concerned about, other than the noise, and we'll have to get over that. Maybe that's a poll question for the future. What is it about an EV that you dislike? So I'm going to hand over to Bob, because Bob can tell you more about this. This has been his bag since before he became CEO.
So I think there's two distinct activities here. The car that Simon's driven, I've driven as well, and it was a great experience. I don't think anybody's got anything to fear from that side of what an EV7 might look like. There are a number of EV7s in the world now, one of which I've seen recently at an OEM who I can't talk about, that have built it A7 with an EV powertrain as a test mule for their own powertrain. It's a motorcycle manufacturer rather than a car company, but that is an interesting that they've chosen a 7. But in terms of our products, there's two distinct avenues of study. There's a brand new car, which is an EV. I don't really want to talk about timing of that, other than at this stage, we have engaged with a car designer. We have engaged with a company to make a show car of it. And just by the very nature with that phase of the development, we've got to be at least 3 years away before that would happen at the earliest, and I think it will be longer. Now, the 7 is a more difficult problem, because actually putting an EV powertrain that is true and credible to the EV or to the Caterham brand is tough. It makes demands on the EV powertrain of size and weight that are just not possible to achieve with the technology that's being used in the EV world today. And that technology is developing. We've spoken to a lot of people from university projects to mainstream OEMs, and we've had the privilege of seeing the next generation of EV, how and where weight improvements will come, size improvements of the batteries, and how more and more kilowatt hours will be crammed into less and less space. I strongly believe that an EV7 has to, even looking at the poll earlier, tonight's activity, the number of people that use their car on track days is maybe not as big as some of the just a quick blast around the local areas or journeys like that. But it has to be credible to the brand, which is lightweight, fun to drive, and simple. And a core element of that is a track day for me. And if you've got a 1 hour session during the day of a track day, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, you want to be able to run for 20 minutes, have a cup of coffee or a tea or a Red Bull, and then get back out on the track and do another 20 minutes. So making a 7 that is capable of running at wide open throttle for 20 minutes, charge it in 15 minutes and run again is a massive challenge for any OEM on the planet. So now is not the right time to put that product in place because the technology is only available in the highest end of the EV world. But very quickly that will become more and more mainstream. You look at the history of some of the typical development is you see a new feature in a Mercedes S-Class, and then 5 or 6 years later, it's standard in a Ford Fiesta. So that technology will rapidly drive its way down into something that is more affordable for us, and we will build a 7 with an EV powertrain. But the core for me is that it has to be credible to the core values. We're aiming, and all of the numbers that we see so far is, we want to have a car that you can charge in 15 minutes, run flat out for 20 minutes, and it weighs something of an order of less than 700 kilos. And from what I'm seeing, that is doable with some of the technology that is coming. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Thank you, Bob. Just a slightly couple of off the wall, not so much questions I'd expect you to be able to answer, but there's sort of things that maybe are thought bubbles to take away. A couple of people have obviously talked about would there ever be a possibility to retrofit current 7s with electric powertrains? That's quite popular in the market, particularly for classic cars. And I think, Simon, you mentioned, the ultra low emission zone, but could you ever see a time or have any view at all on would this be something that people like myself would be able to do to our cars in 10 or 15 years' time? Would you be able to provide packages for us to retrofit?
I think the answer to that is technically, probably yes. In reality, the amount of changes to the chassis will not make it viable. Certainly if it's retrofitting a powertrain that we would build in a new 7, I think the changes would just be too big to be able to do it. In terms of retrofitting a 7 with an EV powertrain now, I am sure there are plenty of small companies out there that would offer that service. And I'm not against that. People are doing it with minis and all sorts of other products. But what you'll end up with is something that will be suitable for a journey, and then you have to trickle charge it because the weight and space that the onboard rapid chargers will take won't fit. And if that product is acceptable for a conversion, for the usage of the customer for that conversion, I think it's fine. I don't think it's something that we should be spending our resources on creating as a product, because we want to create a product that is credible as an EV when it is new. And if people are prepared to make those compromises, that you'll end up with something that's very heavy, take a long time to charge, then that's fine. If you look at some of the products that are out there as some of the more credible ones, the products that Lunaz make are very, very expensive. The products that you can buy a brand new MG that's converted with probably the best engineered conversion story that I've seen, but some of the components that are supplied to that from some big parts suppliers are insisting the performance is no better than the original MG Roadster, and it doesn't have capability of being charged within a very small space of time. So the short answer is I don't think we'll be providing retrofit kits. There will be people out there that can do it on one-offs and two-off basis.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. I think at that point, just to give you guys a chance to recharge your coffee cups, I'm going to go hand over again to John, and let's have the next of our polls.
Thank you, Richard. Poll 3, question 1. Where do you mostly buy your parts and accessories? Question 2. Do you hope to attend these events in 2023?
Thank you very much, John. In which case, moving on to the next topic that we had, and that was to do with independent rear suspension, or the CSR, both linked together. Obviously, the CSR is available, but there's a lot of interest from people as to, will we see IRS more regularly available on our models, or indeed is there much opportunity for the CRS to return big time to the UK market? So I don't know, Simon or Dave. Dave, do you want to take that first and then Simon?
Gladly, yes. There's a wry smile from me inside, because this is a topic that we debate amongst ourselves at great length. We don't necessarily share the same opinion, but nonetheless, you know, we're both passionate about it, and making sure that the product is right, and importantly, that it's the product that you guys want to buy. You know, I'm a massive advocate of the CSR. I think it's a shame it's not in the UK range as we speak, and that really is just due to the demise of the Cosworth engine all those years ago. And amongst all the other challenges that Simon's engineering team has to face to keep the cars road legal, and it is vast and varied, those challenges. And I really don't think that our UK customer base has a real sense of the level of work that has to go into keeping the cars, you know, road legal, particularly in the European markets. So, you know, that is an ongoing challenge, and that means that we don't necessarily get to turn our hands to developing other models, new models, whether they are IRS or whether it's a development of the CSR or whatever. You know, we have to ensure that the base core product range is available for sale. That has to be, you know, one of our primary focuses for Si's team. And as such, at the moment, you know, the CSR and the IRS debate is not one for us today. You know, Simon and his team have been focused on delivering the 340 product for us through the majority of this year, which is hugely important. You know, through the loss of Sigma, we were left with only the 170 model available in Europe. And Europe, you know, is a huge market for us. So it was absolutely business critical that Simon's team delivered a replacement product for the Sigma. And they've done that, and they've done it with great aplomb. Anyway, Si, your turn to talk about CSRs and IRS.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah. We covered it from different angles at times, but I think we are on the same page with it. As Dave says, it's an interesting debate. The way I would pitch it is, well, perhaps a poll question to say that if we launched an IRS 7, would you buy it? And you've got to ask yourselves, why would you buy it? And if you say, is it because it's better? Why is it better? And what does better actually mean? We like 7s for a number of reasons. For me and for many of the owners, it's because of the driving experience they give you. Will IRS improve that experience or not? And actually, it's not a clear-cut question, to be honest. The answer isn't nearly that simple. I won't lie, we do have an IRS development car that we have played with. But to get it right will take a significant amount of development. It would be simple to create an IRS, bolt onto the back end and run around it. We've done that. But to get it right and to give it long-term longevity and tunability is actually a really significant program. So we don't want to go at it so that we can just deliver 3 letters on the end of the car's name. Because there is a danger that it might not be as good as a Didion. It might be a bit softer riding, but will it be quicker? Not necessarily. Will it be as progressive as a Didion? Again, not necessarily. And in that, actually, it's probably unlikely to without that proper development. So we'll have to work out where the drive is for it. And I think the thing is, what everyone wants is a car that drives the same way as the Didion, but probably rides the bumps a little bit better. And maybe we can get halfway there with some more damper tuning and damper development that has eluded Caterham because of our budgets previously. And it is a slightly different world under Japanese ownership. So yeah, I mean, I'll probably leave you. You've asked me a question. I'll leave you with a question. As it was, if the car gives you exactly the drive experience you want, does it actually matter what's underneath it, front or back? And that's it, really.
Thank you, Simon. I don't think you've got how this works, which is I ask the questions, not you. You're just here to answer them, but we'll have a word afterwards. Okay. So on that score, it would be remiss that we've bounced around, and you've given us various bits and pieces on Sigma, but you can understand that's quite a significant engine for a large proportion of our owners. And of course, we've had a lot of questions about, is there any plan to replace directly the Sigma engine? Is there anything to provide an upgrade for existing Sigma engines or support in terms of it? So if I'm a Sigma owner, or I'm looking for that type of car as a new owner, am I going to be surprised by what Caterham can offer going forward? Simon, do you want to answer that again?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'll take that one, Rich. Yeah, the demise of Sigma is a blow to us. We won't lie, but it's probably a much bigger blow in terms of Europe and Japan than it is in the UK. And actually, Sigma has been a real minority seller here, other than for the Academy. So it makes a very small proportion of sales. Quite disappointing in some ways, because cars like the 7310 are, which if there's any owners out there on this, we've always thought that was the real perfect sweet spot in the range, actually. But it never sold very well. So we've lost Sigma in the UK, and at present there is not a plan to replace it. So the bottom end of the range starts with the 360 in terms of four-cylinder cars, and obviously we have the 7170, which is, say, quite a different thing. Amazing fun. Get one on a track. If you get the opportunity, drive on the track. It is hilarious. We should all have one. I think then you become a 2.7 family, because you need one of those for fun, and you need a faster one to scratch that itch from time to time. If there was an obvious successor to the Sigma, we would have used it, but you can see what we've had to do for Europe. And as Bob pointed out earlier on, it is getting tougher and tougher for us. Manufacturers are simply not investing in ICE product. They moved a few years back to three-cylinder turbos. That was appropriate for the regulations as they were then. Actually, WLTP has really not favoured those cars either. I know we've been asked, Morgan have used the three-cylinder, the Dragon engine, but we believe that's due to go in 2024. There's lots of engines that have actually got really short lifespans. And the other part of that, which has been very difficult for us recently, is that the OEM's cycle plans have been in this huge state of flux while various nations decide on what their EV strategy is going forward. So no one's wanted to make any decisions or communicate what their plans are, up in the air, because they don't know where to go. They don't know where to turn. When is EV going to come in for certain markets? What are the incentives going to be? What are the penalties going to be for producing petrol cars? What should go on the front of hybrid? What we're finding is that some older engines are getting a stay of execution. They're being warmed over. And in fact, Duratec has been one of those. To provide hybrid power unit, rather than develop an entirely new engine to go on the front of a hybrid, which will only have a short cycle life. So it is going to be one of Caterham's big issues, if you like. One of our big challenges for the coming years is that a number of the internal combustion engines that are out now or are just coming onto the market are quite possibly the last of their breed that we're ever going to see. And we've got to make a number of decisions over those over the coming years, and look further afield than just on our doorstep in the UK and Germany and France. Other markets have different views. The US has different views. There is, of course, still a big market for internal combustion engines in places like South America and in Africa and Australia. You're not going to drive out into the bush in your 100-mile range Honda and hope to get back. So they have got their place in this world. It's just going to be far more restricted, and we need to make the best of it. But as I said earlier on, who knows how our own market demand will change in coming years. If we were having these webinars, okay, we've moved on a little bit. If we were having these webinars 10 years ago saying EVs would be everywhere on the road, you'd be laughing your socks off, telling us we were mad, that people would be looking at an EV model made by some maniac billionaire as being a very, very desirable product. It just seemed like fantasy, but the world has changed. Oh, sorry, Richard, I'll tell you what, I'll carry on.
You carry on.
I will carry on, yeah. Sorry, but there's one thing, but the other thing is, and I noticed in the chat actually, is about support for existing cars. And we do want to support those existing owners and their cars. We're not Apple. We're not going to make them obsolete because you're going to go out and buy the new one. We know that doesn't necessarily happen, and you might not want it to be the case. And we want to keep as many cars on the road as possible. So yeah, as spare parts for the engine fall away, we will have to find solutions to that, and there are always solutions. But I don't think people should necessarily get too concerned. We've seen on the poll earlier on that the typical mileage for a 7 is about 2,000 miles. That tallies with our own research as well. We would say most people are doing 2,000 to 3,000 miles a year. And as the cars get older, it even drops off from that. And when you think about a Sigma engine in a road car is generally good for 150 to 200,000 miles, clocking 2,000 to 3,000 miles, you're not going to wear it out, even when you do track days. Our race drivers will do 3 or 4 seasons on those cars. Such hard miles. They do a high mileage, absolutely thrash the living daylights out of them, and the engines are still good. They still go. So I don't think people should be unduly concerned that their car is going to be horrifically obsolete and they won't be able to get spare parts for it. If there's demand, we will do our best to meet it.
So oddly enough, Simon, and we didn't rehearse this, that was actually the next question I was going to go on to, was what were the plans to sort of support those owners, I include myself, who run older models and want to run them for as long as we possibly can. A secondary one to that, though, and I know we've spoken about it before, is if you want to provide that support to older models, are there plans to look at revamp or develop the parts websites? We often get a lot of chat about, a lack of information about components when they're available, and we know the issues we've had over those. So are there any ideas about revamping the parts store and providing more information online? And David, I can see you nodding, so can you just give us a little of a flavour of what might happen?
Yes, Richard. Well, the main website, actually, we will relaunch in the new year. So there will be a new website that's not around the parts store. That's our main site. But I do recognise and completely accept the criticism of the parts store, that it's not the easiest to navigate and to find parts. And so we recognise that, and it does need an investment, and it is something that we are looking to do in the next 12 months or so.
That's great. Thank you for that. And on the relation of parts, and we've touched on quality as well, but we do get quite a number of people who contact the club, frustration about issues in terms of some of the components. I think one of the ones was a gentleman talking about the fact he's on his 3rd radiator, which has always been replaced very quickly under warranty, and he's very pleased about that. But it is the 3rd time. And I think, Bob, you and I spoke at some point, about the fact of, in terms of components and maintaining or improve the quality and reliability, what are the challenges you're currently facing in that respect, or what are you trying to do to address those? So again, is that a Simon question, or is that a David question, or is that a Bob question?
That's a Bob question.
Over to you.
So I think this comes back to what I said earlier about some of the systemic problems that we're all acutely aware of as well. And we are trying to address them one by one. We do have some specific actions with the radiator. I can't for the life of me understand why we have such a big problem, because they're all 100% tested at the supplier for leaks before we get them, and it is an ongoing problem. And we are aware that there are a number of other manufacturers that offer some replacement parts that are more expensive, and frankly, I've asked engineering to look at moving towards alternatives to alleviate some of these problems. all of those other parts that we've tested, we've yet to find one that is, save the fact that it leaks, has the same cooling efficiency as anything else that's on the market. So, you know, even the ones that, you know, from a, if you believe, well, it's wrong to say if you believe. So there's a lot of chat in forums about a radiator is better than another, and we've looked at all of them, and we'd like to jump to one of them, but we need some technical improvements in the performance of that radiator before we can sign it off as an OEM that it's okay in every single circumstance. So, you know, it might be that in the UK, it's easy to swap from one to another. Nobody ever gets any problems, but some of our markets operate in the joys of much better weather and hotter climates. And we have to be conscious that it delivers the same performance in terms of cooling efficiency. There's no excuse for leaks, and we need to address that one way or another, but it is at the top of a very long list specifically. But as we've said a number of times today, and that very long list of things to do, we are going to go through that to-do list and do them. But I just want to put in context the size resource that we've got. And this is not an excuse, it's a fact. So in my former life, and you know, I think it's easy for me to come in and say that Caterham should be able to fix all of these problems easily. And when I started, I did. But when the reality dawns on you that if you look at a company like Nissan, it's got technical centres in USA with several thousand employees, technical centres in the UK with hundreds of employees, and the technical centre in Japan, where the core engineering sits, consists of 10,000 engineers, and they make, and that doesn't include USA or the UK, and they have 55 different body types. We have one body type, and we have 13 people in the engineering department. That includes building all of the prototypes, testing them, and doing the design work. So if you do the maths and divide 10,000 by 55, you get a much bigger number per car than we have anywhere near the resources to do some of these to-do lists. I know that doesn't help you guys suffering with these problems in the marketplace, and I am determined to find a way to fix those problems, and we will. But we just have to hit them one at a time.
Okay, good. I'm going to move to the final poll of the night in a minute, but just so that, David, we've had quite a few questions and a couple have popped up about, you know, numbers sold. What's the most popular one? Where does it act? You know, what's selling where in the world? And of course, it's quite interesting to hear what you were saying about, you know, the popularity of Sigma in terms of sales. So when I come back after the poll, can I give you a few minutes to sort of give an idea of what's selling well, how many have gone of the 420 Cup, a flavour of what the market's like out there? Are you able to do that for me?
Sure, yeah, no problem at all.
Excellent. Okay, well, John, can we go across then to what I think will be the final poll of the night?
Thank you, Richard. Poll 4, question 1. Which of these are you interested in? Question 2. When should Caterham build and offer an electric 7?
Thank you very much. So, David, can I hand over to you, please, and just give us a couple of minutes or so on sales and what sells well, what doesn't, or what's likely to?
Yeah, certainly, Richard. Sorry. Struggling with technology then. It must be getting late in the evening. So, yeah, in terms of sales, you know, we build, we sell 550 cars a year. You know, that's been the way for the last decade or so. In terms of the split of that, it's largely around 40 to 45% in the UK. It does go up and down from year to year. And then the 50-55% is export. So, you know, the UK sits around about 200 cars a year, of which about half of those are kit, actually. So we're still delivering about 100 kits a year. It remains, you know, a core part of our business, and there's been some questions, and I've answered already some of the questions on this evening about whether kits will continue, and yes, they will. But we recognise the experience is not where it needs to be, and we need to improve on that. So kits are definitely here to stay, but we must improve our current offering. So as we move, we stay on the UK, then the 420 is the most popular model without question, has been for a number of years. As Simon said, Sigma was a relatively small part of the makeup of road car sales, you know, 270 and 310. And I echo what Si said, you know, 310 was a particular sweet spot in terms of the model range. So it's frustrating it wasn't more popular, but nonetheless, that's the way the UK market has been. Of course, in the UK, there are 56 Academy car sales each year, which are currently still Sigma and will be in 2023 and 2024, as we held back a number of Sigma engines to satisfy that Academy demand. And keep the motorsport grids in the same format as they are. So, you know, there's 56 Academy cars every year. There are a number of 420 race cars, which is probably in the region of 10 to 15 race cars sold in the UK each year. But the 420 is the popular road model. 420 Cup that we have launched this year, you know, being open and honest, we always forecasted for that to be a relatively low volume model. But what it did allow us to do is a huge PR opportunity and a return to some of the best drivers car of the year, track driver car of the year, those type of reviews that we've not been part of for many years, because, you know, the 620 model was launched back in 2013, and a lot of our product launches in the UK since then have been of the historic persuasion. You know, the sprints and super sprints from 2017, obviously the Super 7 range that we've introduced off the back of that. So, you know, we've done a lot of the historic based models, and we really wanted to have another performance model. So we have taken a number of orders for 420 Cup. We've sold out what we expected to sell out next year. As I say, albeit just relatively smaller numbers compared to the standard road going 420. Then if we look in the other markets, just briefly, the EU was predominantly made up of Sigma sales. That's where the vast volume of Sigma sales was in Europe. We have to convert those into the 7340 now, the Duratec model. So that was launched early in November in Europe. The cars will soon find their way into the hands of the dealers, the first demonstrators early in the new year, and the first customer cars early in the new year. You know, early signs are that we should see like-for-like volume sales transfer from the Sigma to the 340. The 170 proves to be more popular in Europe than we perhaps had forecasted, which is good. And as ever, the 170 is hugely popular in Japan, as everybody would expect, with its K-car background. You know, if we could build more cars, Japan would certainly take more product from us, and that product would almost exclusively be more 170 models.
Great, thank you very much, David. Just moving back a couple of sort of wrap up. I'm conscious we're heading quickly towards 9 o'clock. I'd like to thank you guys for answering the questions on the fly as well, which has been really helpful. We've managed to keep up with most of those. One interesting thing, I think, Bob, you touched on it, and I think, Simon, you did as well, is obviously now that you are working with other specialist manufacturers in terms of legislation and what's happening in the future, one of the interesting questions was, is there any opportunity for these smaller companies to share technology? So in terms of electric, and we've had a few questions about hydrogen or other alternative fuels, but are we going to be able to see Caterham sharing its technology with other manufacturers or vice versa going forward? Is that one for you, Bob, as a start?
So we do have ongoing discussions with other manufacturers. If we're specifically talking about EV, though, I think we are in this unique spot where we're very lightweight, and we do have a requirement to perform on a track, even though maybe that's not always the uses they get used for. So if we look to some of the other comparable products, they tend to be heavier and have a different usage profile. And maybe a Sunday drive product is different, but we are actively engaging with our competitors, and there's an open appetite to talk about sharing some components to get better leverage in terms of supply.
Great, thanks. Bob, if you can stay on the line for me as well, in that one of the other things, you talked right at the start, and we've all been quite excited by the news, obviously, that Caterham are looking for a new model. Now, without sort of digging up painful memories, Caterham has tried to bring a new model to market before. We've got Caterham 21 owners in the club, and I know you, myself, and had a look at one up at the big picnic. There was the issue with Renault, and every time I look at an Alpine, I think that could have been a Caterham. So what's going to be different going forward that means that you can successfully deliver a new model at the same time as maintaining the 7? What can you tell us that you found in your first 6 months or so to make us confident that will happen?
The confidence that it'll happen, I'm not sure I can answer that today. The confidence that we can develop a new car, and we've got the financial support to develop a new car, I can be very confident of. The amount of money we're talking about spending on developing a new car is very significant compared to where Caterham has been before. We can potentially do this on our own with the investors that we've got behind us. But I'm not shy to say one of the big challenges is making a product that is a Caterham that isn't a 7. And the previous owners of the company have aspired to do exactly that, with greater or less success. That our new owners are a core part of the automotive industry. They're not venture capitalists, they're not entrepreneurs. They have 300 dealerships in Japan, sole importer of Lotus, Caterham and Morgan in Japan, a couple of motorcycles, second biggest retailer of Toyota in Spain, a dealer network in the UK. So they understand the industry and understand the industry inside out and know how to sell cars. And they have the faith in bringing this new product to market. I think we have to make a product which is credible as a Caterham, which means lightweight, fun to drive and simple. And that's where we're aiming with this particular product.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bob. We're heading very quickly into the 9 o'clock cutoff. So I'm going to sort of finish by throwing an ideal question to each one of the panelists, not giving you any time to think about this. So I apologize in advance. But since we're getting very close to Christmas and you've all got your Christmas lists, if it was about limitless money and limitless time, in the next year, what would you wish to do in terms of the 7? What would be your, if only I could do one thing next year, what would it be? So can I start with you, David?
Build more cars.
See, an easy one. An easy one.
An easy one. Look, there is so much more latent demand out there, and we've just got to take that opportunity.
Okay. And Simon?
Oh, one answer is very difficult, but quality. it shouldn't be forgotten that we drive sevens a lot and we own sevens. Okay, I'm between cars because I've ordered a 420 Cup, and like everyone else, I've got to wait for it. And like everyone else, I'm unhappy about having to wait for it as well. But it's not the big things actually. It's all the little bits, you know, the little bits that don't quite mate up just right, or the fixings. And as I've built my cars previously, I'd like it that you could build the entire car out of one socket set, rather than have to go and find a 7/16 Allen key to do up the grub screw on the steering clamp, you know. But improvements to the small bits of quality, the devil is in the detail.
I'm going to nick Simon's answer because he's what I was going to say as well, but I was going to say a lot simpler: 0 warranty claims.
And when Bob, are we likely to see you in a 7? When will you be able to get one? Do you know is there an answer to that?
There isn't an answer to that because I don't want to jump the queue, and
Yeah.
I quite put a deposit down yet, but I will bite the bullet and get there, and I will have a 7. I've already got the license plate for it. I just haven't got the car yet, and there's a long wait.
I'm going to chip in here, and fear of brown nosing the boss. I reckon Bob has done more miles in a 7 this year than anyone else on the planet. It's certainly, well, you were sparring back the other day in one of the development cars, and every meeting you've been to in a 7. So actually racked up some miles now, Bob. But yeah, you should buy your own one rather than keep using the company ones to go everywhere you want to.
Good. In which case, that takes us bang up to the deadline, exactly at 9 o'clock, which is always a good thing. Let me just summarise by saying thank you very much, Bob, David and Simon, for again another informative evening. No matter how many times we chat, no matter how many times we ask the same questions, I always find the answers informative. This was our 3rd webinar. The number of people who registered and ultimately attended was very similar to those that we've done previously, showing naturally that there's still an appetite for us engaging with yourselves and vice versa. And so I hope you took as much out of it as I'm sure our members did. And in particular, in terms of as we form our ideas behind the 50th anniversary of yourselves and the 40th anniversary of the club going forward next year, I'm looking forward to spending more time with you in person rather than just on Zoom. So thank you very much for that. I'm looking forward to seeing you all. It would be unfair if I wasn't also thank the club's team publicly for all the work they've put into doing this. Everybody will appreciate it. Always takes a lot of effort. I particularly would like to thank John Martin, who's done all the behind the scenes work. Also Michael Calvert and Martin Phipps, who's worked so tirelessly in getting all this together with you guys on the floor. We would also like, of course, to thank the over 400 people who registered, majority of whom joined us this evening. Thank you very much for taking the time to do that on this wintry evening. Please watch out for feedback forms and also for future events. For those that weren't answered on the night, like we did last time, hopefully we can get in touch with you guys and we can make sure that the information is publicly available. I say publicly within the club. We did that last time, so we'll do it this time. But unless you have anything else that you need to do, I'm going to say Merry Christmas to you all, Happy 7ing, and I look forward to seeing you in the new year. So thank you very much and good night to everyone.
Cheers, good night, Merry Christmas.
Good night,
Merry Christmas.
And thanks for organising everything. Take care.